A locked roll-up door in La Habra, California. Dust on the windows. A faded sign that still says, Boyd Coddington. For decades, this address was the epicenter of American hot rodding, a place where a machinist from a farm town in Idaho turned sheet metal and aluminum into six-figure sculpture. Then, in February 2008, the man behind the name was gone. And what happened to that shop afterward tells you more about his legacy than any trophy case ever could. This is the real story of Boyd Coddington's garage, not the legend, the documented record. Boyd Coddington was born on August 28, 1944, in Rupert, Idaho, a small farming town far from any car culture capital. According to his own company's account of his life, he got his first vehicle, a 1931 Chevrolet truck, at age 13, and he was already devouring every hot rod magazine he could find. That early obsession never let go of him. He eventually made his way to Southern California, where, as multiple outlets reported after his death, he worked as a machinist at Disneyland during the day and built cars in his home garage at night and on weekends. It was not a glamorous start. It was a guy with a day job and a hobby that refused to stay small. That hobby became a business almost by accident. As Dick Messer, then executive director of the Peterson Automotive Museum, put it in the days after Coddington's death, it was one of those things when a hobby turned into business. Coddington's early specialty was reshaping 1932 Ford Deuce coupes and roadsters, stripping away the visual clutter, door handles, hinges, anything that broke up a clean line, until the car looked like it had been poured rather than built. Insiders started calling it simply the Boyd look. He also spotted an opportunity nobody else had fully chased: custom wheels. Coddington became one of the first builders to manufacture and sell billet aluminum wheels commercially, and by the time reporters were writing his obituary, wheels by Boyd were selling for roughly $2,000 apiece, a price that would have sounded absurd to hot rodders a generation earlier, who were used to picking wheels out of a salvage yard bin. That wheel business, run alongside the car-building operation, eventually grew large enough that Coddington took an automotive aftermarket company public. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Hot Rods by Boyd wasn't a guy with a garage anymore. It was a name. If there's one build that explains why Coddington's name still means something today, it's Cadzilla, a heavily reshaped 1950s Cadillac built for ZZ Top guitarist Billy Gibbons. Messer called it flatly a groundbreaking car, and it's still cited as one of the defining custom builds of its era. It's the kind of project that took a wealthy client's rock star budget and turned it into something museum curators wanted to talk about. That's the other side of Coddington's reputation: the awards. His shop is officially credited on his own company's history with winning the America's Most Beautiful Roadster Award, the AMBR, the single most prestigious trophy in the roadster world, handed out at the Grand National Roadster Show, 6 times. Some period wire reports, including one from Automotive News at the time of his death, cited the number as a record 7 wins. Either count puts him at or near the top of the sport's all-time list, alongside legends like George Barris and 3-time winner Ermi Amerso. The AMBR isn't decided by popularity. It's judged by a panel of builders, media, and designers scrutinizing craftsmanship down to the weld bead, and Coddington's cars kept walking away with it, decade after decade. He wasn't just a name attached to a shop, either. He was inducted into the Grand National Roadster Show Hall of Fame, the SEMA Hall of Fame, the Hot Rod Hall of Fame, and the National Rod and Custom Museum Hall of Fame, recognition from essentially every institution that keeps score in this industry. And the shop wasn't just producing quiet, respectable customs. It was producing talent. Chip Foose, later one of the most recognized designers in the business, passed through Coddington's operation early in his career, along with builders like Jesse James, who went on to start his own shop. A lot of what custom car culture looks like today traces back, at least in part, through Coddington's garage. In 2004, TLC put cameras inside that La Habra shop and launched American Hot Rod, a reality series that ran for 5 seasons on TLC and later Discovery Channel. The show followed Coddington and his crew, fabricators, painters, machinists, building cars under real deadlines and real client pressure, and it became known almost as much for shouting matches and staff turnover as for the finished vehicles. Several crew members reportedly left for competitor Chip Foose's shop, where the atmosphere was said to be calmer. Even Coddington's own son struggled to stay on staff for long, according to reporting on the show's history. Whatever the internal chaos, the show did something important for Coddington's legacy. It put a face and a workflow behind a name that, until then, most people only knew from magazine spreads. Viewers watched raw steel get chopped, shaped, and welded into six-figure machines. They saw the wooden bucks and English wheels and hand-formed panels that no assembly line could replicate. It turned Hot Rods by Boyd from an industry legend into a household name. There was friction off-camera, too. In 2005, Coddington pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor in a California case involving how certain kit or heavily reconstructed vehicles were titled, a dispute that essentially came down to how much of an original car can be replaced before regulators stopped treating it as the same vehicle, a real-world version of the Ship of Theseus problem. It's a small footnote next to the trophies, but it's part of the honest record, and it says something about how far Coddington's builds pushed the definition of what counted as a restored or original car in the first place. The end came fast and, by most accounts, unexpectedly. Coddington, a longtime diabetic, was hospitalized on December 31, 2007. He was discharged briefly, then readmitted just days later to Presbyterian Intercommunity Hospital in Whittier, California. Doctors performed surgery, and according to reporting at the time, the prognosis afterward was for a full recovery. That recovery never came. Boyd Coddington died at the hospital at 6:20 a.m. on Wednesday, February 27, 2008. He was 63. His company's spokeswoman initially declined to specify a cause, but a company statement released that week confirmed he died from complications tied to the recent surgery, layered on top of decades as a diabetic. He was laid to rest at Rose Hills Memorial Park in Whittier, a few miles from the shop that carried his name. The tributes that followed weren't just from car magazines. Messer at the Peterson Museum called him your modern-era George Barris, about as high a compliment as one builder can pay another, and added, he did things to hot rods and customs that weren't being done by anyone else. But the main thing is he designed cars that were drivable. That distinction mattered. Plenty of show cars are static art pieces. Coddington's builds were meant to be started, driven, and put through their paces, form and function in the same package. Here's where the story stops being sentimental and becomes a genuine business problem. Coddington's wife, Jo, took over the operation after his death and, by all accounts, tried to keep both halves of the business running, the custom car shop and the separate wheel company. It didn't work. Running a boutique fabrication shop is not like running a dealership. Every project in the building is a one-off, tied to a specific client, a specific deadline, and a specific vision that, in this case, had lived almost entirely in one man's head. According to shop announcements circulated to fans and industry forums at the time, Boyd Coddington Hot Rods closed its doors for good on Friday, June 20, 2008, just under 4 months after Coddington's death. The wheel business continued on under Joe's direction, but the hot rod shop itself, the one the cameras had filmed for 5 seasons, shut down. What happened to the cars still sitting in the bays is the part most people never hear. The projects that weren't finished when the doors closed didn't just vanish or get scrapped. Per the shop's own closure announcement, they were moved to 2 new operations, both run by former Coddington employees. Longtime fabricator Dan Sobieski, who opened his own shop in Anaheim on July 1, 2008, and Abraham Rodriguez, a newer hire specializing in paint and bodywork, who took on additional unfinished vehicles at his own facility. In other words, the secret of Boyd Coddington's garage wasn't some hidden vault. It was a working shop's unfinished inventory, quietly redistributed to the craftsmen who already knew how to finish it, because they were the ones who had built it in the first place. That's a less cinematic answer than abandoned garage frozen in time, but it's the true one, and it's arguably more interesting. It means Coddington's DNA didn't stop with his death. It scattered into at least 2 other shops that carried his methods, his standards, and in some cases his half-finished cars forward. If you want proof that Coddington's reputation didn't fade after 2008, look at what his cars have done at auction in the years since. At Barrett-Jackson's 2010 Palm Beach sale, a 1965 Boyd Coddington Roadster, described at the time as the only one of its kind ever built, sold for $184,800, landing among the top results of that entire auction. That's not a garage sale number. That's a serious collector deciding a single Coddington build was worth nearly six figures on its own, 2 years after the man himself was gone. His cars have continued to surface at major auctions in the years since, including Barrett-Jackson's Scottsdale sale, where Coddington built vehicles, among them a 1932 Ford Custom Roadster that appeared on American Hot Rod itself and a reworked 1954 Chevrolet Corvette, have been offered specifically because the Coddington name still carries weight with bidders. Even projects that were left unfinished at his death, like a 1940 Ford wagon that was only midway through its custom transformation, have gone under the hammer as documented Coddington works in progress, sold to buyers willing to finish what his shop started rather than treat it as scrap. Auction houses don't market half-built cars by a forgotten name. They market them because the name still moves paddles. That's the through line of this entire story. The wheels, the trophies, the TV show, the reshaped Cadillacs and Fords, all of it built toward the same outcome, a name that kept generating real value long after the man who built it was no longer around to sign the invoices. So what was actually found when people talk about Boyd Coddington's garage after his death? Not a hidden fortune, not a secret blueprint. What was there was simpler and, in its own way, more remarkable, a fully documented body of work. 6 or 7 America's most beautiful roadster trophies, a Hall of Fame resume across 4 separate institutions, a TV show that ran 5 seasons, a stable of unfinished projects that other builders were trusted enough to carry forward, and a resale market that, more than 15 years later, still treats his name as a mark of serious craftsmanship. Coddington started as a 13-year-old in Rupert, Idaho, with a beat-up 31 Chevy truck and a stack of car magazines. He ended as a builder whose shop trained the next generation of custom car designers, whose Cadillac impressed a rock star, and whose unfinished Fords were worth restoring long after he wasn't around to finish them himself. That's the real secret behind the garage door in La Habra. It was never about what he was hiding. It was about what he'd already proven. One trophy, one client, and one hand-formed panel at a time. If Boyd Coddington's story surprised you, let us know in the comments which part hit hardest. The 6 or 7 AMBR wins, the shop's quiet second life after 2008, or the auction results that keep proving his name still means something. Like, subscribe, and we'll keep digging into the builders who shaped the world of custom cars.